Today's lesson is 10.4 Box and Whisker Plots on page 458. Our purpose today is to create and interpret a box and whisker plot so you can represent quartile data graphically and make generalizations about the data. Okay, let's start with a definition or an explanation as to what a box and whisker plot is. A box and whisker plot represents a data set along a number line by using the least value, the greatest value, and the quartiles of the data. A box and whisker plot shows the variability of a data set. Now, these 5 numbers are often referred to as the 5-number summary. The least, greatest, and then the 3 quartiles, first, second, and third quartile. And here is what your box and whisker plot is going to look like. Now, essentially what this graph does is take our data and divide it up into 4 equal portions. So each whisker is going to contain 25% of the data. And these would be the first 25% and the last 25%. And then the box represents the middle 50% of the data. 25% of the data right below the median, and 25% of the data right above the median. So basically, all of the data is divided up into fourths. Okay, let's talk about how to make a box and whisker. We have some data here on the ages and years of spider monkeys at a zoo. Step 1 is going to be to order the data from least to greatest. So I've done that. Then, once your data is in least to greatest, you're going to identify the least value and the greatest value. Next, you are going to find the median. And know that you find the median by basically starting at the top and the bottom and working your way in by eliminating one piece of data from each side. And then we could see we have 2 pieces of data right in the middle, 2 30s. So we basically have to go right in between those 2. And we know our median is 30, and it would fall right here. Okay, now once we've divided our data up into the lower half and the upper half, then we need to find quartile 1 and quartile 3. So to find quartile 1, we find the median of the lower half of the data, and once again, it's going to fall in between 2 numbers. So between 20 and 26, the middle value would be 23. So basically, we're finding the mean of 20 and 26, add them together. It's 46. Divide by 2, we get 23. Okay, then in the upper half of the data, I need to do the same thing. Once again, I have 2 pieces of data that fall in the middle, 33 and 35. So we have to go right in the middle of those 2, which would be 34. Okay, step 2. Once we have found our 5-number summary, notice we have the least, the greatest, first quartile, the median, and the third quartile. Once we have those 5 numbers, we want to draw a number line, and the number line must include the least and greatest values. Now you can choose to count by whatever you want, 2s, 4s, 10s, 5s, 1s, whatever. But whatever you start counting by, you have to be consistent. So you can see on this graph, they started at the least value of 14 and made their way up to the greatest value of 38. Now, once I have my number line drawn, then I need to place a dot above the 5 numbers that I have previously predetermined. The 14 for the least, the 38 for the greatest, first quartile, median, and third quartile. So I'm going to put dots at those 5 locations. Okay, and notice, I'm sorry, I forgot to cover up the whiskers that are already drawn on the board. But notice, here are my dots. Least, greatest, the median, first quartile, and third quartile. Okay, now we've got our 5 dots on. The next step is to draw your box and whisker. So the first is to draw the whisker connecting the 2 lowest dots and then the 2 greatest value dots. Then I'm basically just going to draw a box connecting the the second dot and the fourth dot, and then you make a line up and down where the median is. And we now have our box and whisker. Now let's talk a moment about how a box and whisker can be valuable, what sort of information it can give you. So the box and whisker below shows the body mass index, or BMI, of a 6th grade class. Question A asks, what fraction of the students have a BMI of at least 22? Now, please remember, we talked about the box and whisker dividing our data up into 4 sections. Just like when we find the interquartile range, we're dividing it up into 4 sections. So 1/4 of the data is at the bottom whisker, 1/4 of the data is the top whisker, and then the other 2/4 make up the middle 50% of the data. So the fraction of students with the BMI of at least 22, we can tell because this is the 22 dot. We need to go over. It is the top whisker, and we know that's going to be 1/4 of the students. Okay, question B, are the data more spread out below the first or above the third quartile? Okay, as we take a look at our graph, here is my data below quartile 1, and here is my data above quartile 3. Now, as you can see, the whisker on the right-hand side is much longer than the whisker on the left. That means that the data on the right-hand side is much more spread out than the data on the left. The shorter the whisker or the box, the more concentrated the data is. The longer the box portion or the longer the whisker, the more spread out the data is. Okay, and question C, find and interpret the interquartile range. Well, we've already talked about how we've divided the data up into quarters or into 25% portions. The interquartile range is the middle 50% of the data, which is everything that is within the box. So if I take quartile 3, which has a value of 22, subtract quartile 1, which was a value of 19, I get the answer 3. So what that means is the middle 50%, or the middle half of the data, varies by no more than 3.